I
Okay.
Dhammarato, I had something to say that I specifically was wondering if you had any thoughts on, and that is that when I'm just relaxing, right, and I can remind myself, oh, just relax. I'll focus on the sensations in the body and the breathing, and just be really, 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 really present. And then like an unwholesome thought will come up or whatever, but I'll just keep reminding myself to relax. And so I've noticed that I'm kind of going in and out of these two kinds of practicing. One kind of practicing is just, oh, relax now. Oh, just relax. Just enjoy. And the other
Mm-hmm.
kind of practicing was kind of like, like not being at war, but kind of being in the arena, like, oh, an unwholesome thought. Okay, replace it with wholesome thought. Oh, more wholesome thoughts. Okay, capitalize on that. Okay, great. Okay, replace that with wholesome thought. Okay, breathe, enjoy that. And what I've noticed is that with the relaxing, there's not as much intense joy, but there's just kind of like a more of like a calm disposition and kind of like a relaxation. But the disadvantage
Why
to
is there
that.
a but? Why is there a but there? Let's go back and review those two things for just a
Okay.
moment. One is
Okay.
that you have a relaxed joy and then an intense joy.
Yeah.
Okay, the Pali word for that is piti and sukha. One is a skill to be developed, and the other one is a skill to be developed. So that should make perfect sense there.
What I'm noticing is that when I'm in the relaxed joy, it's easier for unwholesome thoughts to like uh, grab me, I guess,
All
or
right.
grab my
Now
attention.
that so you can see that. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You don't have to make anything a problem or make anything a worry. This is
Okay.
just a natural process.
Okay.
This moment is all you've got.
Yeah, it's just sometimes I just don't know what to do. And then I know there's
I
nothing to
know
do
that's the whole
but
point is
relax.
you keep getting confused about there's something to do.
I know. It's like, it's like a slippery eel sometimes. That's how it feels.
There actually it is exactly that way because there is no eel. And here you are grabbing and thinking that you're holding a slippery eel and it slips away where in fact there's no
I know.
eel there.
I know, man. It's like, I don't know. I'm just practicing as much as I can, and every
You
moment I
don't
can
have to
remember.
practice as much as you can. Practice because it's fun. Practice
I am.
because you enjoy it.
I am doing
Well,
that.
as much as you can sounds like that you're reporting into the principal's office.
No, I'm just dedicated. That's all. I just care about practice.
Okay, well, let's leave the dedication off and start using enthusiasm instead. That whole idea of dedication, that's a very, very Western concept. And it has sneaked into deep, big time into both Hinduism and in Buddhism. Um, that in fact, Goenka even teaches a thing called strong determination sittings. And listen to that word determination.
Yeah, I don't mean it quite like that. I do mean enthusiasm. I think
All right,
enthusiasm can
let's
be an
use the
expression
right
of
words
dedication.
for it then. Let's use those words enthusiasm.
Okay. All right.
And you don't have to do it all the time. That's one of the things also, because
Mhm.
that's very time oriented over a long period of time. And what we're practicing here is something that we can do in this moment. We
Mhm.
practice what we could do in this moment, okay?
Mhm.
And so basically, we can remember in this moment. But if we plan to remember all of the moments, then we're going to be that's bound for being
Mhm.
disappointed.
Mhm.
Let's not
Yeah.
try or work very hard at it. Let's enjoy the fact that I can remember to feel good right now. Sorry, there, a little Dhammarato moment.
I remembered, wowee, this is great. Ooh, this feels good. Yeah.
Yes, you're not going to be in Nibbana all the time.
Hmm.
Not going to happen.
Hmm.
But the question is, are you going to remember from time to time?
Hmm.
Are you going to remember at the time when you really need to remember?
Mm.
That's the important point then. Okay, let us say that life is very much like Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and it will go wrong at the worst possible moment. That's why we want to develop Sati, so that it will be there for us unremitting, which means it will come back for you when you need it the most.
Mm. Mm.
That's when we need the Sati. We need it when we need it the most, and we don't have to have it developed all the time. An example of that would be when we need it the most would be that somebody just fell off the porch. Another time would be
You break up
that
with your
you
significant
you
other.
another time would be when you put your credit card on the internet and it's canceled. That would be a moment of, now I need Sati right now. Another one would be you're tooling down the road in your car, and the interior of the car starts to have blue and red flashing reflections of lights while you hear a siren behind you, and you look in the rearview mirror and there's a cop there. Okay, that's when you need Sati. The wife comes in from her job and she enters the room. That's the time when you need Sati. When you open the bill from the electric company, that's the time that you need Sati. This is the way of thinking about it is that there's points of time that we need Sati. When are those points of time? That point of time is when you're really most likely to go off into bad feelings. That if you're already in an okay state, there's nothing wrong with it. We need to keep those okay states going. So anytime that there is a point in time when you need Sati, then it would be useful to have it right then. For that reason, we want to practice building up that skill of Sati. Yes, Joe, you got a question.
Yeah, it's related to this. I had a moment today where I opened up a thing from the government, and I had filled out some forms wrong, and some application had screwed up. And I knew that this was a moment where I was needing the Sati, but there was some momentum to the feeling, the panic of, oh shit, I really screwed up. And I just wonder, because there was part of me that was like, okay, I realize I'm being mindful right now, because this could go poorly. And I just wonder how should I have handled the emotion, the like emotion that was rising, that was quite strong. I tried just being aware of it and continuing with it.
All right. Most people will kind of bull through how they feel. And what I mean by bulling through how they feel is that they will pay more attention to the piece of paper than how they feel. Or if you see something on the paper that's an emergency, many people will immediately rush to their computer and log on to see what they can find about it online while their heart is thumping, right? The better thing to do is to pay attention with our sati to how we feel. that nothing is such an emergency. I mean, if it came as a letter, it couldn't possibly be an emergency. So why do I have to feel like it's an emergency right now?
Mm.
Good point.
And
So
I felt like I kind of came to that where I was like, okay, it's a letter. I can just take this slowly. But the feeling sort of stayed for quite a long time. And it was kind of like, okay, well, should I deal with this anyways now? Because I needed to call somebody. Should I deal with this anyways, even though I'm continuing? I'm aware that my heart is beating a little bit fast.
all right, the answer to that is no. It is better to take care of business when you're in the best possible shape, not taking care of business because you feel like it's an emergency.
Okay.
Okay, that in fact we can use that word emergency because things emergent, they come up. The emergency is always within, not outside. Okay. Emergency medical things, emergencies like that, in the sense of they race to the scene of an accident. This is the mentality that we have, is that we have to race to the scene of the accident for emergency whatevers. And we can change that attitude if we can remember to change that attitude. This is where the Sati comes in. So you could say something like, wait a minute, let me sit down and take a few deep breaths and watch the heartbeat slow down. And when the heartbeat slows down and I'm taking a few deep breaths and beginning to say, hey, I can handle that. I can handle that power company. I can handle that government. I can do this. Yeah, I screwed up. So what? No big deal. Nothing is worth worrying about. Nothing is worth clinging to as I, me, or mine. So when you get yourself into that kind of an emergency, the best thing to do is to remember, oh, I don't have to feel like this. This is just an old habit. Let me just sit down and we'll be okay. And so we start having some wholesome thoughts. We can take care of this. There's no problem here. Everything is going to be all right. Everything is fine. I can take care of that government later. You hear that winner's attitude in there. I can handle that. I can take care of that government later. Right now, I've got much more important things to do, like getting myself into a really good state of feeling good. And when you say that you can deal with that later and put it off and get it out of the moment, now you can come back to a state of homeostasis and feeling good. And then you can grab that letter and look at it again and feel bad again. And so you set it down again and say, never mind, let me get myself back into a really good state. It may take you 3 or 4 times of picking up that letter, but eventually you're going to pick up that letter and say, there's nothing to it. But you actually have to practice. So that's a good meditation object for you. Or let us say a trigger.
Can tell it. Yeah, because it triggers me just thinking about it a little bit.
I imagine everyone on the video right now is remembering some piece of paper that they got triggered with and are triggering themselves all over again. Yes. Even routine things will trigger us. An example of a routine thing, they don't do it anymore, but up until in the middle of the Trump administration, the Social Security required every recipient of Social Security to fill out a form once a year. Except that form that they fill out once a year, they mail it to you, and then you have to fill it out and then send it back to them. Well, Thai Post and the U.S. Post are not that friendly with each other, and so there was one year when I didn't get it, and because of that, they stopped sending the Social Security checks. Panic mode, right? No, it didn't matter whether I panicked or not. The point is that I went online, found out what form there was to be filled it out, and sent it in to them. And then they picked it up after 2 or 3 months and sent all the money all at one time. So wound up being a surprise. So instead of missing 2 months, we wound up having a third payment that was triple. There was never a problem. There never was. But the panic about missing that one piece of mail, and it was just routine. It was just a routine thing, nothing important, until the human mind wants to make it important. In fact, everything that has ever been important was only because some human being thought it was. Other than that, nothing's important. Not inherently important. Inherently, nothing has any meaning. Hang on, Alex. Let me finish this one thought. And that is, when the Buddha is teaching the concept of anicca, dukkha, anatta, and talks about it from the perspective of anicca, vata sankhara, and anicca, dukkha, sabbe dukkha, all dukkha is sankhara, but sabbe Dhamma, anatta. In other words, all things are no self, which means that all things have no inherent core. Now, the physicists have taken that all the way down to string theory to see that there's nothing left but just strings of vibrations. And they call it strings because that's what humans think of as vibrating, like on the violin or a guitar or something, vibrating strings. No, the reality is down at the quantum level, it's just vibrations without even the strings. The strings in this case, when we talk about a string theory, we're giving it back a self, the string. The string is not there. The only thing that's there is the vibrations of self. All right, so when we realize, like from that perspective, nothing has any meaning anywhere. All importance, all meanings, all values are simply thought forms for humans, concepts. Nothing really inherently matters. And that is freaky for some people to understand, that all meaning is what they give it. What is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is whatever you want it to mean. That you're the one who is applying meaning to things, but if you don't apply the meaning to things, then nothing means anything. And that's where the liberation comes, is when we drop putting meaning on things. We stop using that as a ball and chain. If it's got power, if it's got meaning, if it's got importance, that means that it's got some sort of self to it that we want. So if we see that there is no self in anything, that means there's no inherent existence in anything, and that everything is just a sum total of stuff that's put together and stuff that falls apart. And so things like meaning and purpose in life, these are things that have been put on by humans basically for one human to control another person. These are all power plays. If we can tell the child that it's important that he clean his room, he'll clean his room. If you tell the child, oh, I don't care whether you clean your room or not, it's not important, then your child is unlikely to clean his room. Now, if we understand that some things then are important, that we can choose what's important, and one of the things to choose that we're important would be that these are the things that we worry about because it's important. So we worry, we give it energy. But if you're recognizing that, oh, it's only important because right now I think it's important. And so I'm worrying because I think something's important, but if I recognize right now, it's not important. At any particular moment, it's not important. That means that when you do it, you can have fun with it because it's not important. It's just a toy to play with. And then you have a happy, easy life because nothing matters. You've probably heard the phrase, mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. And so this is what mindfulness is all about, is to mind or pay attention to what we pay attention to. If there's anything then that's important, it's important then to look at what you're doing. That's what's important. Just look at what you're doing. And if you're worried, you can say, oh, that's not important. Okay, Alex, you got a question?
Yeah. So I noticed like in some moments I'm getting into a good state by deliberately like seeing the unwholesome thoughts and replacing them with wholesome, and then congratulating myself for having more wholesome thoughts and feelings. And then that gets into a good state, right? I start to feel good. But then there's also when I just relax and don't deliberately do any of that other stuff and just relax, I
But what
kind
are
of
you
start
doing
I kind of start
undeliberately?
what?
What are you doing?
When I'm relaxing?
Yes. What are you doing?
Relaxing. Well, what I'm doing is I'm focusing on the body and the breath and just like being present, like holding it like an object.
Okay, so when you're relaxing, that means you're not trying to follow some program or set of rules or something. You're just relaxing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Thank you for finally
Yes.
listening.
Yeah, and that's what I've been doing today.
Oh, okay.
And so my question was, um, when you talk about getting into a good state, like it occurs to me like those two are different. Like relaxing and like getting into a good state are different. And I'm
Keyshawn, is that
curious
a
if you
new rule?
Oh, come on. Don't bring him into this. I'm asking
Joe,
you.
is that a new rule that he just made?
That was a
Uh,
question.
it sounds like a little bit on towards the unwholesome, I would say. But I've had similar thoughts
Uh-huh. Okay.
myself, so I can recognize it.
All right.
Just relax.
Yeah. In other words, when you're relaxed, why are you judging that relaxation against something else?
Hmm. I don't know. It's just because relaxation didn't exist to me really. The notion of like actually relaxing didn't exist to me as much as it does now, because of last night. But before last night, our conversation, Dhammarato, I've just been deliberately getting into a good state. But I notice now that when I relax, it also gets me into a good state. It's just kind of different, and
Okay.
I don't
So
know.
what?
I I guess the prescription here is that there is no prescription, and that you just want me to stop sharing my thoughts because they're not helpful to me, is what it sounds
Uh,
like.
yeah, right. The thoughts are not helpful to you. They're basically you're trying to get it right.
Okay.
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 That in fact, if the old man says don't go south, go north, and you turn north and you start going north, and you're saying, is this exactly north? Maybe this is 1 degree off. Maybe it's 2 degrees off. Am I sure I'm going north? And he's just talking about a general direction north. He's not talking about a specific 1 degree point north. And this is what you're trying to get exactly right, where in fact there is nothing exactly right. You're trying to actually, going back to what we were talking about before with the idea of purpose What's your purpose? Alex, what's your purpose?
I don't have a purpose.
Good, finally. Now that you have no purpose, then you can stop judging the relaxation and just relax.
Okay. Okay. So that's all. That's all that's going on. That's what you think's going on. I'm just judging it.
Yes,
So,
very judgmental. Trying to get it exactly right when there's no need to try to get it exactly right. But you never will get it exactly right. And if you do, it will waver off of that just a little bit, and then it's not exactly right again.
I feel like
You
I
need a
completely
lot of wiggle room in here.
I completely understand what you're saying, and I'm completely confused. But that's okay.
All right. Drop the confusion. You don't need it, and just relax. You don't have to relax and confused. You can just relax. Drop
All
the
right.
confusion. Recognize the confusion as a hindrance. Because this is very simple. Relaxation is simple enough. I mean, how can you get confused over being relaxed? David.
Oh,
what you got?
yes.
Well,
Yeah,
if it was simple, everybody would be doing it. Just saying. It's not that simple.
So,
You're trying to make it hard. It is simple. But you have to keep doing it over and over and over again. What makes it hard is you think it's going to stick, and it's not going to stick. You have to keep putting it back into place.
Okay.
yeah, I was just going to bring up maybe because like before when we were talking about getting into like a good state, it was sort of in contrast to okay when you're opening up like that mail from like the government or what have you, and it's like, oh, right, there's that anxiety or whatever, right? So there's like hindrances there essentially, right? So that's really more the absence of those, right? The hindrances, right?
Right.
Like, so it's not like you're trying to go deeper or whatever. It's more just being like, you get back to that contentment and satisfaction, and oh, this is, relaxation is good enough. But like again, that's in contrast to, the hindrance, like being under the hindrance of, oh no, I got this and now I'm going to lose my house or whatever, wherever it might go, but this building up. So it's more just getting yourself out of that and spotting it, not like this huge comparison once you're in the wholesome, right? Per se. Yeah. Where you're like judging that, like, and it's like, oh, but it should be more wholesome, to the point where it's like antithetical, where you're just like, this is never good enough, and you're just going and going and going and never satisfied, right? Is that, yeah.
Yes, the whole quality is just the basic point is satisfaction. That's what we're shooting for. In order to be satisfied, we have to be completely free from any fear. Hello, Robert.
Welcome.
And as long as I see Robert, hello, Dhammadas, I see you too. Good to see you.
I don't know if you could hear me. How's it going?
Everything is okay. Everything is fine. No
Awesome.
worries, mate. So, let's go back, DJ, and visit the hindrances for just a moment. Because many of us cannot see the distinction between what is a wholesome and an unwholesome thought. For instance, we are worried about, am I doing the practice right? That is an unwholesome thought. Because if we're worried about, is this the right practice or not? Of course, it's not the right practice. Why? Because we're in a state of worry. But the point is that we keep thinking in our society that we got to have more information and more information and more information and more and more and more and more, to where really what we're looking for here with this practice is just enough to get us going. Okay? That's all we need, is just enough to get us going. So you could say like this, that in order to do this particular job, the child needs just this much education and nothing more. The child does not need a law degree in order to draw a little flower and under it says, "I love you, mommy." Okay, that's all that we need to do is just to have enough skill to draw a little flower and say, "I love you, mommy." We don't need any more skills than that in order to do that job. So the meditator, all he's got to do is just to draw a little flower in his mind and say, "I love you, mommy." That's all there is to it. But we think, oh no, I've got to read a book called the Abhidhamma. I've got to read a book called the Visuddhimagga. I've got to read this, that, and the other thing. I've got to go take these classes. I've got to go this, that, and the other place and pay $7,000 for a teacher certificate. And then I can draw a little flower and put under it the caption of "I love you, mommy." Well, guess what? Most people who have those kind of degrees have spent all those years not drawing any flowers and not saying "I love you, mommy," because they're too busy getting an education so that they can do it. And this is very typical in Western Buddhism, is that you think that you've got to know everything in order to get started, where in fact, no, there never was that much to know. That in fact, it's due to the teachings, and the teaching years ago actually is way back when, that when a teacher is getting ready to give the students a lesson, that teacher really does need to know that material that he's going to give those students. So at the end of the semester, the teacher is probably going to know just a little bit more than the students. In fact, you would expect him to know a lot before he started. What he really needs to know is how to learn. So all of this background that you hear about all of these various sutras that we're putting together and all of that, none of that was really necessary. But it's useful in teaching, but it's not necessarily all of that useful in practice. That I don't sit there and read sutras or review them or whatever like that when I'm just sitting and relaxing. When I'm sitting and relaxing, there's really nothing to do. There's no studies to be done. There's no worrying to be done. There's no new information that's needed, because we've got everything we need, which is very little. I remember a very long, about 3-hour conversation that I had with my friend Achan Dhammavitu over on the other island. And the whole conversation was basically between the two of us about how simple and how small the entire teachings of the Buddha really are. There's really nothing to it besides the joke. I mean, all you have is just dukkha nirodha, dukkha and dukkha nirodha, and everything unpacks from there, which means that you can pack it right back up to that in this present moment. Any hindrance that comes by, throw it out and just be here and relax. That's all there is to it. It's a simple switch. Are you going to feel good, or are you going to feel ordinary? Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm relaxing really deep right now, and I noticed that there's sometimes really strong energy, like jerks and sensations going through my body. I
Oh,
was
well,
curious
never
if
mind. I know that feeling very well. In fact, I've been a jerk off.
is
And
that
thanks,
normal?
jerk. Yes, it's absolutely normal.
Okay.
Don't worry
All right.
about it.
Okay. It makes it hard sometimes to enjoy it. It's a little uncomfortable, but
No,
that's
you
okay.
decide not to enjoy it when you see the jerk. Instead of, aha, I see that too, and just let it pass. Don't worry about it.
Okay. All right. And my body, it feels like my body is buzzing right now. It's
Okay.
crazy.
Well,
It's like
it does
buzzing everywhere.
energize. Yes, when you take deep breaths and do the correct practice, that's the buzzing you feel. But the word buzzing is not as possibly good a word as we could use. I would prefer that
Vibrating.
how about vibrantly alive?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable,
Vibrant.
but it's really cool too. It feels good.
All right. When you say it's uncomfortable, that means that it's not familiar.
Yeah, it's pretty it's pretty intense.
All right. But if you keep practicing, that's going to be a normal state that you can actually energize.
It's pretty nuts. Yeah.
Well, it's called the human body. And sometimes you feel like a nut and sometimes you don't.
Okay. I just noticed like when I relax deeper and deeper, the energy gets more intense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does.
Congratulations. Yippee-ki-yay. Woohoo.
Nothing
Let's
to
have
it.
nothing to it.
Nothing to it. Everything is easy. Everything is okay. But the normal human mind that's trained in our society is trying to get it right. I mean, every time that you drew a letter of the alphabet, somebody came by and complained, oh, you could do that better. You could do this better. Nothing is ever good enough. And so we bring that mentality to our practice.
Oh.
And when we begin to see that, oh, I've been hard on myself unnecessarily. I've been setting standards, setting rules that I can't even make and meet myself. That in fact, our society is full of rules. My favorite example is I've heard that the IRS has 80,000 pages of rules. And that's just the IRS.
That's nuts. Oh my God.
Well, that's what lawmakers do. They make laws, and they've been making laws for 200 years. And sometimes they have to make the same laws over and over and over again. That's the whole point about laws, is that they're trying to plug up all of the loopholes, when in fact, it would be much easier if we had a society that was socialistic rather than competitive. That's the basic difference. Because of the Cold War and because of the misuse of the word communism, and also because the right wing and the conservatives and the capitalists of the United States have made it a dirty word, we don't even look at the fact that what socialism means is people being social with each other. Have you ever been to an ice cream social?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is the ice cream social where the great big tub of ice cream belongs to one guy and he's eating it all while everybody gets to cheer and watch him eat ice cream?
If I'm there, yes. No, I'm just kidding. No, we had like little cups of custard.
Right. Well,
Everyone had
and
together.
everyone gets some. That's the
Yeah.
whole point of the social.
Of course.
But if you go to a capitalist ice cream, that means you got to pay for it if you're going to get any ice cream. So if we begin to have, and that's the whole, also the idea of the Sangha, is so that we can share among others this joy that we have, rather than capitalizing on it. I mean, can you imagine that someone is giving a retreat, teaching people how to meditate, and charges money for it? That doesn't make any sense. And yet that's the capitalist model that we have in the West. And so if we can think of it in the sense of having joy and sharing it with others, then that is the whole practice of metta. That's the whole practice of compassion. That's the whole practice of sympathetic joy, is to have joy and then go around vibrating with that joy so that others can pick up on that joy and feel good also. And so we begin to change our mentality from a capitalist society, what's in it for me, into a sharing mentality of, hey, we're all in this together. Let's have a ball. Let's have a party. Let's have an ice cream social rather than an ice cream truck. So if we live in our lives looking at it from the perspective of social and sharing, then that means then that each one of us doesn't have to feel so importantly responsible for our own lives. That we're all in this together and that we can share and help one another. But if we have a capitalistic point of view or a narrow-minded point of view or an I, me, mine, and I can get what I want to out of it, then the society that we live in is going to remain in conflict. It's almost as if that democracy is a formal definition of perpetual conflict. Now, the idea of democracy is that we don't want to have one person in power because eventually we will have one very greedy, very bad person in power, and then we're stuck because he'll want to take all to himself. And so what we need is two groups of people who are in power so that one at a time they try to take everything for themselves. And I don't see in that regard the value in democracy because it's just a perpetual warfare where the society is not intentionally trying to get along. In fact, our society in the United States is intentionally trying to make conflict so that people can take advantage of it. And so what we need is people who have the mindset that we can spread around our joy and our comfort and our satisfaction with others so that we can begin to change the society's mentality. But we can't go change it by changing laws and rules and regulations. And that's the way that most activists try to do. They try to activate to get people in power to do something new, to where in fact people in power are going to do nothing but make new rules and make new laws. We don't need rules and laws. What we need is friendship. This starts with our mind. Can you be friends with your own mind? Can you stop worrying? Can you just give it a break and just rest? Everything's all right. Everything's fine. And we can come to a state of satisfaction. Everything is all right. No worries. Everything is easy. Taking a deep breath and letting it out. Just relax. Relax. No place to go. Nothing to do. And we keep practicing that way over and over again, and pretty soon we begin to feel that way. And then, just when we need it most, just in that time when the red and green and blue lights are flashing inside the car and the whistle or the siren is blowing, that's when we need to come back to this state of I can handle this, everything is okay, this officer's got a job to do, and I imagine he's doing it very well. I should congratulate him for doing such a good job.
Dhammarato, I forgot to tell you that happened to me. I got pulled over by a police car. It was like 3 weeks ago, and I thought about you immediately because you give that example, and he pulled me over, and I the heart started beating, and I was like, wait a minute, he's my friend. And he pulls up to the car. He's like, hey, good evening. Do you know why I stopped you? I was like, hey, good evening, Officer Patrick. And I just like looked at his name. What can I do for you? And he was like, well, one, you were speeding. Two, you don't have your new sticker on your license plate. And there's some other reason. And oh man, my insurance, like I went through the glove box and there was like papers shuffled everywhere. So like it wasn't convenient. It was not at all like organized. It probably looked like some kind of criminal. And I was like,
That was an unwholesome thought. But
that
never
was an unwholesome thought. That was
That's
an
what the
unwholesome
cop
thought.
was thinking. That's the cop's thoughts.
But no, and I just kept throwing him out, and a lot of really great stuff happened. Actually, he went back to his car and he came back and he was like, "So I'm gonna let you go for 3 reasons. One, your birthday is the same day that my puppy was born. 2,
That stretch.
I think he said like my brother-in-law or something. His name is Pappas, so that would be bad blood if he gave me a ticket. And then 3, I don't remember what the third one was, but it was just like, what? What were the chances? So I didn't get any ticket, nothing. That was awesome.
Well, when I'm talking about this story, very rarely would I say that it's unlikely for you to get a ticket, but here's the proof of it. If you treat the cop very, very well, he'll even invent excuses to not give you a ticket.
You're saying that he might have unknowingly invented excuses because of the joy that I was spreading.
Mm-hmm. Exactly so.
Hell yeah. That was
Because
awesome.
think about his normal night. I mean, what kind of people does he normally stop that are all with their heart beating and racing and they're fidgeting around and they're angry at the cop for stopping them and they're in panic mode and all of this emotional stuff is upsetting. And there the cops are ready to shoot anybody because people freak out.
I just had this interesting insight that like no one likes feeling like they're the villain. But when you come up to someone in a car and they're just straight up scared of you, you have no choice but to fill those shoes, and that's uncomfortable. So they act like a villain in your perception and in theirs. That's so interesting. Huh.
Robert, I see your hand up and I see the blue lights behind you. Are you talking? I see your hand. He's muted. Okay, never mind.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me
Yes,
now? Hello?
yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, this reminded me, I was with a friend of mine, Dhammarato will probably be able to guess as soon as I tell this story. And I was with him, and with a police officer pulled us over. He pulled out $500 and gave it to the cop, and then we just went on our merry way. So that's another way of making friends.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It depends upon the bribe, not whether you bribe them or not. Can you bribe them with enough money?
Yes. So it worked in this case.
Way back when, so long ago that it's just you can think of it as another person, but I'll use the pronouns of I, me's, and mine so that it makes sense. But there was one time because I was sick in the hospital, I missed 2 weeks of class in what is called spherical calculus, which is a third degree level calculus. And so the professor gave me an incomplete in it. Well, I was wanting, to have a double major in computer science and mathematics, and I needed that credit, I thought. And so I walked into his office with $800. That's the amount of money that I could come up with at the time. And he turned me down. And that incomplete stays still on my record. And I'm very happy that he turned it down because I really needed that money. But it wound up that I still had enough credits anyway. So even with that incomplete, I still got a double major in math and computer science. And so it didn't even matter. But that your point about bribing, it depends upon the bribe. Now, if I'd have had $8,000, he probably would have taken $8,000, but 800, that was not enough for him to change a grade.
Did you try the sob story? I'm so passionate about mathematics. I'd really like to pass this course. Could you please give me like just a passing grade? That's all I need.
I don't remember that conversation, actually. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Let's see, 30, 40, 50, 55 years ago.
Yeah.
So I don't remember any particular conversation, but anyway, yes, that's that whole point about, but as Alex was praying, he gave this cop $500 worth of good cheer.
There you go. That's worth a lot more.
Right. So that's the way of looking at it. And that's not even dangerous. Offering a
Right.
cop and not offering him enough money, and he'll bust you for trying to bribe him. You got to give him enough. And you don't even know, is 500 enough?
Right.
So the better thing is to make friends. So, but the point that we're making here is that we can put ourselves into a bad state at any particular point in time for no reason. That if, let us say it this way, if you are in a family to where you have a relative that's a cop, an example of that was my grandfather was the constable. He didn't do very much in that town, but he did put the gold, because there was a gold mine in the area, and he put the gold on the train. That was one of the things that he did. But back in the 1950s, there was not much to it. But because of my mom's relationship with her dad, my mom saw every cop as a happy relative.
Right.
Very few people see the cops that way. You can live in another kind of culture, and every cop is an absolute disaster.
Right.
Well, if you see a cop as an absolute disaster, he's going to make it a disaster for you. If you see a cop as very friendly, he's going to treat you that way. But we have to have that presence of mind to remember, rather than to go into what we would call automatic pilot of being terrified about getting stopped. So congratulations, Alex. You had mindfulness when you needed it the most.
I did.
So if you have
And
mindfulness at the point of contact when you really, really do need it the most, then you can handle any situation. So the next time that you get all confused about how to practice meditation, you can say, wait a minute, I handled that cop. I can handle this moment too.
yeah.
Confidence sure is nicer than faith.
Yes, confidence really is a lot better than faith. Because you know that it works, because you practice it and seen it. To where faith is, who knows?
Dhammarato, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. There's a famous, philosopher, David Hume, from like
Yes,
the 18th century, and he said that constant conjunction does not mean causation. And what he meant by that is just
I
because
know.
you keep. Okay, got it. So, what are your thoughts on his observation?
Absolutely important. That in fact, this goes back to the teachings of the Buddha. And look at the words we have, paticca, in the word paticcasamuppāda, that we normally in our language think of it as cause and effect. But a much better word to use would be conditioning. In other words, you can take raw lemonade and condition it by putting it some water, and condition it by putting some ice, and condition it by putting some sugar in, and you've got lemonade. Okay, which means basically we're watering things down, we're cooling things down, and we're sweetening things up. We could do that with any lemons that we're given. Practice of anapanasati is just that. Having gladdening of the mind is putting the sugar in it. Having nibbana, or cooling things off, that's putting the ice into it. And taking the importance out of it is watering it down. And so this is a way of looking at it from the perspective of that it's not a cause. The sugar does not cause lemons to become lemonade. That is not an actual causality, it's a conditionality.
What's the difference?
A lot. All right. An example of, you've heard about the domino effect, that one domino hits another domino, which hits another domino, and we kind of think that that's the way that the mind works, to where really what's going on is that things are conditioning rather than causing.
Can you talk a little bit about that, like the difference between conditioning and causing?
All right. The conditioning then would be that that an unwholesome thought will condition the feelings, but it doesn't cause the feelings. That the feelings are just there, and they arise and are exhibited based upon their conditioning, but their causation is a much more, let us say, DNA related thing, that we do have feelings. And so the kind of feelings that we have are then just merely conditioned. So
are
the
you saying
tree falls over in the wind. The wind conditioned the tree, but it was the root structures and all of that other stuff, because a lot of the trees don't fall over in that particular wind, but one tree did. Why did that tree fall over? It wasn't that the wind caused it, because if the wind had caused it, then the wind would have blown over all of the trees. But it did condition it so that other conditions with that tree were such that maybe the roots were bad or whatever. So that when that wind blew, the conditions then were correct so that the tree fell over. And this is the way that we can look at it. This more clear. If we think of it as causality, then that's actually back to a rule-based system. That this causes that, and that we teach paticcasamuppāda in 12 steps, talking about causality of this step causes that step, and that's not actually a better way of the best way of looking at it. A better way of looking at it is that that this condition that we're in was caused by several of the items on the paticcasamuppāda, not caused by just one. So an example of that would be when we create an internal image of something that we see on the outside. The example that I normally use is I see a tree. And when I say the word tree, you guys will each one picture your own tree in your own mind, and I guarantee that every one of those trees are different because of your concept. One will get a fir, another will get an indigenous, another will get a kind of a palm, etc., like that. So that when I said the word tree, my saying the word tree did not cause the tree to come into your mind, but it conditioned your mind so that you did think of a tree, but the tree that you thought of was some tree out of your past. And
I
so
don't
you can see.
I don't get that. I don't get how causing and conditioning are different. It sounds like they're the same.
Okay, well, you go figure it out. Okay, here's another thing. You hit your thumb with a hammer. The hammer, when you hit your thumb, you can say the hammer caused my thumb to be sore. But in fact, no, the hammer just conditioned your thumb to be sore. There were other conditioning agents. In fact, the structure of the blood systems and the way that your fingers are built. So that if you hit the hammer with a clay finger, that finger is going to be hit and broken in a completely different way than your actual finger.
Okay.
Okay. Because there are other conditioning agents in there. So you could go so far then as to say that the hammer actually conditioned my thumb to get bruised, to where no, the bruising itself was something that happened inside of the finger itself. That there were other things going on that caused the bruise, not just the blow of the hammer. There was blood and blood vessels that were broken and all kinds of other things that were going on inside of the thumb that caused it, that conditioned it. Did not cause it, but conditioned it. But you see that whole idea of causing versus conditioning is built into our language so that we say causation all the time, where in fact really what's going on is conditioning, not causation. Yes, Robert.
Yeah, I think maybe another way that you can put this is, I think there's maybe two other ways you could phrase this. One is conditioning implies a span of time, right? So when you say, weight conditioning, like weight training, like gaining conditioning for your body, that implies like a span of time over which pressure is exerted that strengthens your body in a particular way. But I think it also implies multiple different things going on, right? So you could say, the conditioning of one's mind is due to a bunch of different factors. It may be working with the teacher, it may be therapy, it may be the environment, your relationships, etc.
Maybe Sati to remember.
Yeah, Sati,
Yeah.
the breath.
Absolutely. And so conditioning implies multiple different things going on at once over a certain span of time, whereas causation implies a single moment in time where we're trying to attribute a single A that's causing a single B.
That's really, really excellent, Robert. Thank you for that. That really helps, that whole time span kind of thing. It does.
So if that's the case, then is causation just an illusion?
No. Yes, causation actually is generally misunderstood. I wouldn't say that there are no actual causations. There are some things that cause other things to happen. But let us say the teacher yelling at two kids, and one of them cries and the other one bursts out laughing. You cannot say that the teacher caused the kid to cry, because she did the same thing to both kids, and one of them laughed, but she didn't cause him to laugh. But she conditioned him to laugh, and the other she conditioned to cry. But there were other conditionings in there that caused the kid to cry. Now, maybe he's yelled at home, and the other kid is laughing because he's got let us say, a Buddha in his family.
Yeah. Another way I've heard this described is like an emergent style of causation versus the typical A to B. And by emergence, what is meant is everything is interconnected because there is no self, there is no, solely existing objects in a vacuum that aren't connected to anything else. So therefore, when something happens, it's due to many, many different causes or conditions, right? And so there's kind of this emergence of phenomenon within our existence, within our reality. People lose sight of that, and they like to say, oh, I'm mad because he said X. In fact, you were mad because of this whole emergence of all these different things happening, including your upbringing, their upbringing, the weather today, how hungry you are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how things happen, is as this emergence of phenomenon.
Excellent. Robert, what you're saying there is actually quite brilliant, in the sense that causation looks like things are separate. This separate domino fell and it hit that other domino, and these dominoes are separated. And then the second domino fell over, and that second domino hit a third domino. Okay. That's the idea of causation. But if you look at it from the position of conditionality, as you were saying, there's a whole lot of factors that had to go into play for that one domino to hit the other domino. One was proximity, another one is position. He could have felt that first domino could have fallen on that second domino that wasn't upright and didn't have any place to fall to. It was already fallen over. Right? And so you can see that there was a whole lot of conditions going on, including, surprisingly enough, gravity, because you can go do that domino thing up in outer space and you can push one domino and it'll just lay on the other one and it doesn't knock it over. So there's a whole lot of conditionings going on in that regard, and thanks for bringing that up, Robert. That's an important point. Is that conditionality has to do with the fact that there is a whole lot of conditions that are interrelated, that we're all just kind of one, and that the difference then is that conditionality sees that oneness, and causation sees it as duality. This caused that, rather than conditionality is look at the interrelationship between this and that, like the interrelationship between sugar and lemon juice. That the sugar does not cause the lemon juice to become lemonade. We think of it that way, but really it's a conditioning. Because the reality is that it's the taste buds that are in the human mouth that is tasting both of those things in combination, giving it that particular kind of taste. And so let us say that if you put the sugar in the lemon juice, but that's never drunk, then then it's not lemonade. That is actually lemonade when it's drank. Before that, it's just lemon juice and sugar. And so there's many, many little combinations of things in there. And when we understand paticcasamuppāda that way, is that these things condition one another, rather than this causes that. That if we see it in this way causing that, then the sequence and paticcasamuppāda winds up being very, very confusing for so many people. But when you see it as conditionality, then we can see that, ignorance conditioned our ways of learning things, and then our ways of learning conditioned this particular moment when we see something. And so the way that we perceive things also is part of that conditioning, so that the salayatana then is a sum total of a whole lot of things, not just one event after another like that. We can also see that the practice of anapanasati is interrelated, interconditioning, rather than sati causes me to look, and looking causes me to see, and seeing causes me to discriminate, and discriminate causes me to change the mind to a wholesome thought, and that's the gladdening. And so that cause and effect way of looking at it makes it rigid, judgmental, critical, and that when we see things as just conditionality and cause rather than causality, just conditioning, then we can see things as a much more interrelated, nurturing situation.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I see that now.
Okay, excellent. Joe, you got your hand up.
Yeah. I just was reminded of a question I've had recently. It's a little bit related. The word Sati sampajañña or Sati sampajañña. How does that relate to Sati? Because I was like reading about it a little bit and I heard it in a discussion and they seemed like similar, but I didn't really get the distinction between the two.
Sati say the word again.
Sampajañña, Sati sampajañña, SAMPAJA. I can just put it in the chat so that way it's easier.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm pretty sure I know what word you're using. Okay. The Sati sampajañña is just another more complete way of saying Sati. You can see this, the sam in there is it means true. And so you could say that the sampajañña is looking at or seeing the pieces as they fit together. The jñana is actually the pieces, and paticcasamuppāda means the togetherness. So sati paticcasamuppāda is actually seeing the way things are put together, or another way of saying is seeing that conditionality, seeing the interrelatedness and the way that things are constructed there. That's actually a very useful concept for us to understand the distinction between cause and effect as dualistic in nature. And the cause and the effect means that which is caused is different than which is affected. But in the Sati sampajañña, we're seeing how things are interrelated and interconnected with each other. That at one time as an exercise, I took the 12 steps of dependent origination in order and then started putting feedback loops as to how they were related and interconnected. And I wound up throwing that piece of paper out because everything was related, everything was interconnected, and there was no reason to find one more important than the other. That if we feel a certain way right now, that will condition how we feel later. So that means that feelings are conditioning now the Sankara. Well, wait a minute. Sankara is number 2 on the list, and feelings are number 7 on the list. How could you've got it backwards that way? Well, that's only when we see it from the position of the cause and effect. But when we see the conditionality, then we can understand that these things are all interrelated. And that the 12 steps are taught the way that they are just merely for the understanding of it. Possibly a good way of looking at that is that when feelings occur, I like it. The next thing that happens is I want it. And the next thing that happens is, which is tanha, and then upadana, which means I got to have it, or the clinging. Also, the next step is bhava, which is the becoming, and you can see the deep interrelationship between the liking and the becoming, and then the actual clinging is also the same thing as the self, because when the clinging happens, that's the self that does the clinging. If there is clinging, there is the idea of the clingor. So when we see all of this as conditioning agents, it really makes a lot of sense. When we think of it as merely causality, how then do you say that, how does upadana create becoming? And then how does becoming give birth, and how does birth then give dukkha? The answer to that is these things happen really quickly, and they're really closely interrelated with one another. So that the actual grasping or going out is the becoming, like the pregnancy. And then the actual attachment to it, the grabbing, that's when the birth of the self happens. And that grabbing is also the simultaneously of the dukkha that arises. So when you see paticcasamuppāda in relationship to the interrelationships and the conditionality, it makes a whole lot more sense than when you see it as a strict condition or the causation. I hope that this is going to be some useful to you when you begin to figure out your own mind, rather than seeing it as a step-by-step sequence of events as if it were a computer program, rather than saying, no, that this is much more like an analog computer where things are interrelated. Yes, Robert.
Hi there. So quick question. So I was listening to a podcast today, and Duncan Trussell podcast, which is kind of a fun one. And he had on a Tibetan Lama, and he asked her an interesting question. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, which is, what is the value of Western psychology when taking Buddhist psychology into account? And he talked about a time where he asked Ram Dass for advice, and Ram Dass said to him, "Go see a therapist."
Oh,
You
I
know,
was going to ask you which Ram Dass, but I think I know now. It was Richard Halpert.
yeah. He said, like, enough of the spirituality, just go see a therapist, because he had been very spiritual, and he was a student of Ram Dass, and he just said, "Hey, just go see a therapist now."
hmm
So, yeah, I'm curious to hear if you think Western psychology has its place separate from the Dhamma, or if the Dhamma is just much superior, or if there's no need for Western psychology, or if there are certain ways in which it's more superior.
I would say that we need to look at Ritz crackers and cheese. Okay. That Ritz crackers and cheese are better if you put the cheese between two crackers and do a combo. Or it's all the same thing as chocolate chips and ice cream, right? This is the way that we're looking at it, that they can complement each other. And that the way that they would complement each other is that the main thing that's missing in psychotherapy is the concept that the client has responsibility for cleaning up their own mind. In the idea of psychology, the client pays the therapist, and now the therapist, who is getting the benefit of the money, is now responsible for fixing the client. And many people go to a psychotherapist the same way they would go to a medical doctor, expecting the doctor to do all the work. And so the main thing then the psychologist has to instill upon the client is that I can give you the tools, but you're going to have to learn how to use these tools. And that would be the main difference of the teaching of the Buddha is that the Buddha is going for that practical point of it's up to individual, each one, to clean up their own mind. It's not up to the psychologist to do it for them. So that's the number one thing. After that, we can look at it from the perspective of that if people were doing anapanasati correctly and seeing unwholesome thoughts and replacing them with wholesome thoughts, then what would be a psychologist perspective on that? Because many times the psychologist is not actually trying to get the person to change their individual mind. They normally go, or thought in this moment, they normally go for trying to get people to change their perspective or to change their attitude. And so they try to talk them into having a different attitude, rather than the way that the teachings of the Buddha goes is more of a step-by-step sequence, in the sense of this present moment, you need to change this thought. And if you keep changing this thought over and over again, you will begin then to change the attitude quite quickly. So it is possible for people to practice both psychotherapy and meditation and make really, really quick results. Other people will see conflicts between the two because this one teaches this thing and that one teaches that thing, and I get confused about which one is right and which way to go for it, and then the student is not going to make any progress. I will also say that I learned a whole lot about myself when I was in psychology, but I didn't know how to change any of it until I'd gotten with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. Even with all those years of meditation, I still didn't get down to what really needed to be done. And possibly the one that's the most important one, or the most obvious one would be a better way to say it, was anxiety. Yeah, I knew all about anxiety. I mean, I even had it down wired that I knew why I got really anxious and uptight on Sunday evenings. I figured all of that out in psychology, but it wasn't until I was able to deal with the anxiety directly that I could do something about it. And so I would say that, yes, you can use psychology and psychotherapy and the Dhamma together and gain great benefit from both of them. You could also say that one will work without the other, but that's not generally the case. And now that I've gotten to psychology, I use a lot of psychology when I'm teaching the Dhamma because that helps the students understand the mind better than the ancient ways of the time of the Buddha. The way that the Buddha spoke, everybody already knew how the mind works with that kind of language. Now we live in a different world with a different kind of language that's, let us say, highly influenced by psychology. For that reason, it's better for us to use psychology when we're talking about the Dhamma. But you were making a distinction between going to a psychotherapist kind of psychology rather than a Dhamma use of psychology. And if you think of it that way, then what is the job of the psychologist but to call someone on their crap? But what is it that a Dhamma teacher is going to do other than that's his job, is to call people on their crap? That the students can make the same mistake over and over and over and over again away from the teacher, and then make that same mistake over and over and over again in front of the teacher. If the teacher doesn't bring that up, then the student will not see it. An example of that is there's a big difference between feeling good and worrying about feeling good. But some people can't see the difference. And it has to be pointed out over and over and over to them. So the question is the psychologist and or the Dhamma teacher going to be honest with the person and show them what they're doing, and can he do it in a way so that the person sees it rather than getting ticked off? That in fact, the psychologists have kind of a perspective of that the psychologist should keep a student or keep a client long enough for the client to figure out what the problem is by themselves, because, and the teacher can give hints. But if the teacher actually teaches, or the psychologist actually gives the client the lowdown, if the client agrees with that, he'll say, "Thank you very much. That was my problem, and I'm out of here. Besides, you're too expensive." And if the client hears information that he does not like and disagrees with, he'll say, "Oh, this psychologist doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm out of here." And so that's the time then that the students will leave the teacher, is at the point of time when the teacher's actually doing his job of pointing out what the problems are. And a lot of psychologists won't do that. They know exactly within their context, within their frame of reference of psychology and psychotherapy and all of that, they know exactly what's wrong with this guy and exactly what he needs to do to come out of it. But they dare not tell him that for fear of losing him as a client. Does that help answer your question, Robert?
It does, and I have a couple of follow-ups. So one is, what are your thoughts on CBT and DBT? You know, cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, because they seem actually rather similar to focusing on specific behaviors and patterns of thought and changing them. And they've shown a lot of clinical efficacy. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm actually not an expert on the newer labels and things that are putting in. I assume that a lot of this stuff, like cognitive behavioral therapy, is going from one method of psychotherapy, like Skinner's behavioralism,